Hey everyone, it is Dr. Ramani with what's tonight, episode 3 of Succession, and I gotta tell you, I'm overwhelmed. You can see, I'm just literally overwhelmed. Such major spoiler alerts on this. Do not watch this if you have not watched this series, unless you really are just sort of a glutton for getting things spoiled. Otherwise, oh my goodness. I'm taking my little notes thinking I'm going to comment on all this little stuff. And there we go. The moment, the one, the only, the thing we knew was going to happen, but we didn't know when. Logan dies. This is the episode where we get to really do the deep dive into what happens when a malignant narcissistic person who's at the center of a system ceases to exist. So it's so fascinating because here's number one. I have to say, for me, there was a certain vindication. And again, I always sort of bow down in respect to the showrunner and the show writers who had the good sense to take Logan out early enough for us to actually watch what happens to the other characters in the absence of Logan. Logan is always going to be the shadow, like any malignant narcissist in a system. We don't get to see, we saw sort of almost 1- and 2-dimensional versions of the other characters. Now it's game on. We're actually going to see what happens with him out of the picture. But the other thing we learned is, the hypothesis I sort of will hang my hat on forever is narcissistic people don't change. And right to his dying day, Logan, on the way to the airplane, was still testing the loyalty of Roman, testing the loyalty of Tom, flying to close a deal. Right to the minute he took his last breath, he remained narcissistic. I think there's a lot of fantasies out there that as the narcissistic person gets older, that it's going to get easier, or there'll be some form of deathbed confession. If anything, it was the kids who were still scrambling to get in there and offer their last words. But Logan went down completely nonplussed and with absolutely seemingly no remorse over what he did. So now he's gone. And again, absolute props to Brian Cox for what might have been the single best depiction of a narcissistic person on a television show. That seat was originally held by John Hamm in Mad Men. Brian Cox just took that over. So again, that was just something to see. Let's talk about what the death of a narcissistic person does. Let's focus on the show first, right? So now with Logan gone, what happens? Here's what's so fascinating. You saw this experience. Again, I'm sweating. I'm so excited about this episode. You saw this sort of interesting empathic coming together of the 3 siblings. I found that fascinating because I do think, like, if we think back to the very first episodes in season 1, when the father was sick in a hospital and they still weren't unsure of how it was going to be, there was a lot of backbiting and all of that. But what we're seeing is an evolution in these characters, which is fascinating. And you have these 3 sort of lesser narcissists compared to their father, but they seem to be able to join forces. What's fascinating is Roman, like any good vulnerable narcissist would, you saw the absolute discomfort, the anxiety over firing Jerry did to him, and sort of what it means to now ultimately betray his siblings. Remember, narcissistic people are not psychopaths. If Roman had been a psychopath, he'd been like, fine, I'll fire Jerry. I don't care. I don't care what happens to Jerry. I don't care if I'm backstabbing my siblings. Roman was always a nervous wreck. He by far was, like I said, the most trauma bonded to his father. And here this was going to come out. Who was the only one of the 3 siblings, 4 if you count Connor, but of the 3 who went to the airport, who was the only one who got onto the airplane and had to see the body? Roman. Roman remained fully trauma bonded to his dad. Roman is the one where we're going to actually see some interesting growth with the removal of the father. As long as Roman's father was alive, the only way we can depict it is Logan was casting such a big shadow that the grass could not grow underneath that. With Logan gone, we're going to see some interesting stuff. Kendall got an interesting zinger in there when he told his dad he didn't forgive him. From a survivorship perspective, straight up, that's the sentiment a fair number of survivors have felt about a dying or dead narcissistic parent. May not be the last thing they tell them, but I thought that was a really interesting depiction that Kendall was out. We had established that Kendall was really done. And while he is broken up, he's very quickly able to pivot to sort of the workings of the company. Now, Shiv being broken up is fascinating to me. because I think that Shiv, again, the most like her father, even though Roman was the most trauma bonded to his father, the Shiv was the most like her father. And I think that she had pinned so much hope on that relationship. And I think she always still thought that she was going to emerge as his favorite. So while she was playing hardball, in many ways, she was emulating him. But we keep in mind, multiple things are falling apart in Shiv's life too. She's going through a divorce. Her father died. Her husband betrayed her. She has a lot going on. But obviously, her emotional reaction was almost more in line with what we would expect. Connor is the interesting dark horse here. Something got cleared up for me, and maybe it was cleared up in earlier episodes and I missed it, but I always wondered what happened to Connor's mother. We get that mystery, at least I did, got that cleared up in this episode when we come to find out that Logan had admitted her to a psychiatric hospital when Connor was a very young child, and thus that whole weird thing with Connor and the cake. It was some sort of traumatic and attachment trauma around cake, which he ate the day his mother was taken away. First of all, that's almost like old school evil gaslighting, where somebody of Logan's power, influence, and obviously malignant narcissism in trying to sort of dispose of a person they didn't want around anymore, had them committed to a psychiatric institution. It is the ultimate, like the end all be all gaslight. And so now we can see where Connor's sort of attachment, deeply anxious attachment style comes from. Not only was he abandoned, but in this absolutely sort of bizarre fashion. And my guess is if we were to really go back and tell that story, I don't think we'll ever know it. So I'll make up a story here, which is Connor's mom might have been so narcissistically abused by being married to someone like Logan that she actually did look like she was falling apart. And then he used his authority to get her out of the picture, likely to marry the woman, Carolyn, who would become the mother of the next 3 children. But with Connor, it was fascinating to see Connor go ahead and get married. In a way, I was not surprised. Connor's attachment to the father is very, very different. I think he was clearly supplanted by his 3 siblings. And then him and Willa have as authentic a moment as the 2 of them can. He becomes vulnerable about, I don't want you to leave me. And she owns up to, I'm in it for the money. And I think in that honest moment, he was able to actually create something that resembled, at least in the short term, an honest relationship. But he does not have, in fact, his first comment when the dad died was that the first thing that he basically said was, he never even liked me. I never got the chance to make him proud of me. That dynamic was seen across all of the kids, but I think in Connor trying to run for president, I don't think you can go bigger than that, there was always that there, but he didn't get himself insinuated into the company. So obviously he wasn't affected as much in the day-to-day. But what we see again here, this isn't just Succession, but this is life at large. Anybody where we see a significantly malignant, powerful, overwhelming narcissistic parent in a system die, there's a lot of chaos that can ensue. There are complicated reactions. Kendall not forgiving, Roman not being able to communicate emotion, but yet still being so trauma bonded that he was the only one, like I said, who went in the airplane. Shiv having what almost seemed like the reaction within normal limits, but she was the one who was able to get it together and give this statement in the airport. But they were very quick to pivot to thinking about strategy. And I think in a way that was an interesting homage to their father. I don't think he'd expect any less of them, that ultimately it was always business. For about 20 minutes, we saw that they cared about like, oh, maybe we shouldn't be worrying about this. We need a minute. It's all about the market, isn't it? But within 20, 30 minutes, they regrouped and recognized, yes, it is all about the markets. So there's sort of this big glaring honesty that's about to come up. But when a narcissistic patriarch or matriarch dies, it really exposes the system for what it is. The people in that system, particularly the adult children and the adult children most affected, will now be stepping into very, very different roles. If anything, what we might see is that ongoing individuation and their more true colors are going to show. They're all going to remain narcissistic. It's not like this is going to be some sort of narcissistic eraser and Kendall and Shiv and Roman are going to become nice people. They're all going to retain their narcissistic characteristics. What I'm really curious to see is how the writers write this out in terms of how they work with each other. I think that moment of drawn together empathy that we saw in that moment on the boat for those few hours while they had to process it. That was a rare moment. I think with their father gone, because they had united against the narcissistic father. You'll get narcissistic people to organize to take another one down. Without that common enemy, other than the board and selected people on the board, Frank and Jerry and whomever else, and obviously this deal with Mattson. But without that, the triangulation is going to begin again, but in a very different iteration. Without Logan pulling the strings on that triangulation, now what we're about to see is how these three kind of come into their genuine way of triangulating without it being about winning over a father's love. But I do have to say, at some level, Roman of all of them is the one who's most likely to carry the torch for his father. He's the one who seemed the least resolved all his life, right up until this episode, about his dad. And I think that that's where we're going to see, we might very well see Roman almost trying to vindicate more than anybody else. I love what we see in Roman's character, how complex a vulnerable narcissistic character like his is, the emotion, the confusion, the trauma bonding, the guilt over Jerry, the need to fire Jerry, and then still turning to her to regulate him when he felt sad. And she just got up and walked right out. He had fired her about an hour or two before that. I've also found that Roman's comment after his dad died, he said, "I am on a human level actually sad." It was such an interesting comment because I think that gets to, again, that narcissistic division between expression of authentic emotion and performative emotion. And for all three of them, but I think particularly Roman, that disconnection in emotional expression, which is definitely a cardinal trait we see in narcissism. It's too vulnerable to express that kind of emotion. Roman has almost had it trained out of him or trauma bonded out of him, and thus all the strange ways he tried to regulate sexually and Jerry and all of that. But I actually, this whole idea of, he said, what did he say? I want to get that right. I am on a human level, like actually sad. That humanity, which does lurk in the heart of every narcissistic person, that's sort of where the emotion sits. But for it to come up brings up shame. Roman is so defended that he's like, yep, sad, human emotion. But he is, again, too well trained for that to come out. It would have always put him in too vulnerable a position. A couple of other odd bits I want to get in there. Tom's in trouble, right? This is almost like, this is watching a chess game. And now Tom has lost the protection of the piece that's keeping him from getting checkmated. Tom is acknowledging, I lost my protector. He's telling Greg that. He knows it. And so he is out there, he's swinging out there to get taken down. And with Tom, he doesn't have enough insight to get that he was really only there because he had vindicated Logan with the kids. And so when Logan died, Tom's career probably goes with it. So now the big question becomes, how dark is Tom going to go to be able to hold his old time position that he had when he still had Logan as a protector? Nobody else likes him. So this is going to be, I think that we're going to see a real darkness come out of Tom. Greg is also in a little bit of trouble too, because his allegiance with Tom, who was so well protected. Well, if you thought Tom was vulnerable, this really makes Greg vulnerable. But Greg is such a shapeshifter that he may try to shapeshift to sort of insinuate himself with the other three. Remember, still don't think Greg's narcissistic. I still think that he is somebody he's sort of that enabler, remora fish that kind of follows the shark around and gets the stuff that comes out of their mouth. And then, let me see my last. The other thing I wanted to get to was Carrie's reaction. So Carrie may very well have been in shock. So I want to give her that. I mean, whatever relationship she had with Logan was her relationship. But the first place I went to was Carrie's odd emotion on the casting tape to become a newscaster. We saw that same disconnect in her emotion here. I don't know what's going to happen with Carrie. She may know where the bodies are buried, kind of thing. So she may have some muscle in this. But given that she has no one sort of acting as a protector, certainly trying to make her a news person, I don't know what we're going to see from Carrie. So I was not sure on what that reaction was. I was trying to give her grace and think maybe it was just shock, but the odd emotionality we saw that kind of in both places. So I'm going to make an admission here that tells me I've actually spent too much time in the dark alleys of narcissism for a minute. Maybe I wasn't the only one. You can drop it in the comments. Maybe I wasn't. But I have to say, for about 10, 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, I thought that they were lying about Logan. I really did. I thought this was some sort of gambit to get emotion out of the kids because because Logan was flying to see Mattson, and that he was trying to get some kind of buy-in, and that the kids would agree, and then he would magically recover because he wasn't sick. So that's how dark I went, which it's terrifying to think that I actually thought something more sinister than what was happening on the show. I didn't think they were going to kill Logan off in episode 3, but here we are. But it was a really smart maneuver because it sets us up for the rest of the season. Again, like I said, to find out what happens when the kids not only don't have the antagonism of their father, but frankly, the protection of their father. At this point, without their father there for the first time, they actually have to show up as adults. This is a very new role for them. And this is this is either their moment to shine or to fall. Now what you're seeing is a subterfuge between Frank and Jerry and Mattson and the kids and everyone volleying for position here. And then the question is going to be, who is going to be the last person left standing? You got me. I mean, this twist took me, but I think it was a really, really, really well articulated episode on what happens, A, that narcissistic people don't change, B, the reaction of it, the reaction to it. And what I thought was really compelling about this episode is that for us as the viewer, at least for me as the viewer, there was a tremendous empathy drawn out there for me. I was like, well, I kind of feel bad for you. And especially if I could see almost like the childlike vulnerability. You could see these 3 siblings, almost as small kids, always wondering when the dad was going to come back. I'm sure he often stormed out a lot. And I think that also speaks to how much we get pulled in different directions by narcissistic people. These are just false characters. And I felt like we were on a wild ride with them. And it sort of opens us up to the humanity of, it's not like we're just saying, oh, we just want nothing to do with people with these personalities. We're very much drawn into their personal pain. And I think that was very much shown today, but none of them really, other than Shiv, who did a decent job of actually being very much with her emotion, Kendall, and especially Roman, the struggle with that. So like I said, now we get to see how this plays out. What does grief look like after a narcissistic person, especially a significant one like a parent who was cruelly narcissistic to the end? This is a very, very complicated process of grief. It does not resolve easily. Many people who have had narcissistic parents pass away have said, I feel this really complicated mix of relief and sadness and regret and confusion and guilt. Grief is always difficult with the loss of a parent. We're about to see with the loss of a parent like Logan, how difficult it can be. So again, I each week I just am thinking this is just, it's almost too much. It's so unbelievably good. And how we're watching this unfold. And I guess Brian Cox gets a break for the rest of the season, which that's the one thing I'm going to be sorry about, is not seeing him every week, because those performances and the way he portrayed that character, unlike anything I've seen. But honestly, my eyes on Roman, he's my favorite character to watch these days. I hope you enjoyed the episode and my little narcissistic breakdown. See you next week.